Rich. We're going to get Nate on here. Hi, Nate. So glad you could join us today. And for those of us who saw the Teaching in Arizona documentary, we know that both you and your wife are high school teachers, and that you're also parents of some young kids. And just
That's
like
right.
Rebecca mentioned, everyone's in the house together. How's teaching going this semester? Are how's it going? Are you online? Are you in person? What's it like for you?
Well, I've been teaching all day, so I got to ask the same question, ask my students, can you hear me clearly? Am I coming through clear?
Yep.
All right. I'm full remote. A lot of my colleagues have gone back to the classroom and are teaching fully remote from their class, but I'm actually teaching fully remote from my house, as is my wife. And we're there also with our 3 children, navigating laptops and that kind of stuff throughout the day. But for me, looking at the Expect More AZ data, 52% of teachers were concerned or very concerned with returning, and I'm sort of part of that piece. And so our district announced that on the 22nd we'll go back hybrid at somewhere between 20 and 25% each day. And so as I talk with teachers and students, it's just like preparing for each day. It's disorienting, can be a little overwhelming. There can be moments of fulfillment, but largely it's exhaustion and a hope as opposed to a knowing that you're reaching kids the way they know you can.
So when you say 20% in person, when I've got twins at home who are in first grade, so I've become familiar with these terms about synchronous learning and asynchronous learning. So this would be a
Right.
synchronous situation, and asynchronous would be you've gotten the materials, you're studying on your own, or you're watching the video, which isn't live. So when you're talking about that 20% in person, I think you told us previously it's 20% in front of you live, but the other 80% are live via video in front of you too. Is that right?
Yeah. So in right, 20%, 25%, 50%, depending on, right, I haven't talked about that. Teachers are, in my case, 20, 25% are teaching with students in the classroom with mitigation pieces in place, right? Masks and 6 feet, and having to clean and disinfect at the end, but also having a contingency of kiddos at home that you've been teaching remotely for a few months that are learning from you too. And that piece is part of the concern amongst colleagues that I've spoken to, is how do you manage teaching online fully remote at the same time? Understand that part of bringing kids back 1 day a week as opposed to every other day is to help with that mitigation and to give them some social emotional support. But there really is no silver bullet here. It's pretty complicated, and for educators it's incredibly complicated because we want Ivan to go back and Rebecca's kids to go back as soon as possible because that's the best case scenario. But largely depending on the site that you're at and their ability to mitigate the dangers of that, right? The kids can come and go and largely scientifically can be asymptomatic, but for many of us with families with right, folks with pre-existing conditions, or a lot of my colleagues are older, right, we're rightfully so concerned with how that'll play itself out too.
Yeah. So thinking about, as we transitioned, I remember I picked up my kids from the last day before spring break, kind of hoping with my fingers crossed we'd be back a week later. But as I drove the car in the rain with a double rainbow, interestingly, over the school, we found out that it wasn't going to happen. They were going to be out for a while. Last semester, the end of last year was so different than this year. Do you feel like you're better prepared for teaching remotely this fall compared to last spring, or how do you feel about that?
And I feel more prepared because I had more time to prepare. I don't feel more prepared because I had more preparation necessarily with folks helping or with district professional development. I mean, I'm not throwing shade necessarily at my district, but this whole process has sort of been done very quickly, and whether you've been teaching for 30 years or this is your first year, we all feel like first year teachers. And And so preparation is it can only go as far as anybody's prepared for their first year of doing something completely new, and trying to sort of reinvent that process. So for educators, it means more hours in the evenings. It means trying to reach out to kids. I mean, Ivan talked about how a lot of it is students reaching out to counselors or teachers, as opposed to before, where teachers could lean over and ask kid how they're doing. Part of that is just minutes and hours and energy in the day. And so, yeah, I feel a little more prepared, but it's the verdict's still out on how well I feel I'm actually doing.
Yeah. How do you think it is for your students? I know I've heard you talk about the challenges that your students have, teaching in a low income community. How well do you think your students are prepared to engage both virtually or this hybrid model? Do you think is it different than last semester? What challenges are there still out there?
Last semester, because there wasn't a lot of grade accountability, a lot of students dropped off. And so districts were quick to talk to the state and make sure that there was accountability there for grades. And so that piece is only motivating, it's motivated them, right? But it only goes so far. And you can, if you were to look at my grade book, for example, you would see that we're 7 weeks in now or so. And you can begin to feel some of the kids who are drifting in the AB range and some of the kids that are dropping off. And so when you reach out to them or they reach out to you, it's not, at least in my experience, right? Anecdotally, it's not a lot of kids just not caring. It's a lot of kids who they're just tired. Right? They worked till 12. They got 3 siblings at home. The electricity got shut off, and so they couldn't log on for a couple days. Right? The expectation for kids to go 6 classes, 6 hours a day, every day, and for schools to still be on the fence about covering all the standards and going through standardized testing and ACT, all that stuff wears them down already. So it's been really incredibly tough on them, and not possible to get them all the academic information that they need and be able to support them to learn that.
Yeah. How do you to that point, how do you think that this pandemic has potentially widened achievement gaps? Do you think there's solutions for helping our students so that our achievement gaps aren't going to get wider, or to help mitigate?
Yeah, I mean, you can absolutely feel, even just class to class and student to student, those that have support at home and have family members that are able to give them the space and support to learn, and those that don't. And I've gotten to a point where I'm excited for them to show up, right? Like I tell a dad joke of the day, and I want them to be there because they want to be there. And then I get a chance to connect with them via email or hang out after a Zoom meeting. And I've gotten to a point where I'm trying my best to get them as practical information as I can, but also teach them the soft skills that they need as they move on from high school to college, because this is a perfect time for them. Rebecca talked about this brilliantly. Like, this is the perfect time for them to figure out how to manage all of this chaos, how to reach out to teachers or to counselors, how to look at what they're interested in and how they spend their time. And so it's a time for, certainly they need to learn into math or English or these things, and that's going to be part of their day, but they got to transition into that personal responsibility piece, and that will be a way to get what they can out of this experience, even if it's overwhelming and they still desire to move on to higher education.
Yeah, I think it's a real shock to all the systems, because I said my kiddos are starting first grade, and I think there's a lot more personal responsibility for them, even to figure out what their passwords are and all of those things changing from space to space than there probably would have been if they had been in person with their teachers. So I think it's not just there's the tension with personal responsibility, right? That might be different for older kids, and then there's also a group of kids that are learning, getting tools as younger children that are probably different and a different skill set. I mean, my kids know to mute themselves when they get on Zoom better than a lot of adults do, but it's a challenge nonetheless. How can you Can you talk a little bit about how you think schools and policy makers can best support teachers? Because when I think about supporting teachers, it's not just supporting teachers. When you're supporting teachers, you're supporting teachers be the best that they can be so they can bring the best out of students. So what's your advice for policymakers and schools supporting?
Certainly. I think the pandemic has sort of shined a spotlight on, exacerbated, however you want to say it, already pre-existing issues. So we suddenly are talking about class sizes. Right? We're suddenly talking about access to resources. We're suddenly talking about infrastructure and ventilation and crumbling schools. We're talking about access to professional development or respect or pay. And none of these narratives are new. None of these realities for teachers are new. And so the way to best support teachers or educators or just the community that you're around by supporting education is to take the experiences you had during the pandemic and the difficulties you had and realize that for some this has always been, and for schools we've been navigating those issues for a very long time. And my school in particular, coming from a very low income area, has had to rely heavily on federal funding, and we got a lot of money. Every kid has a laptop, but teachers are leaving left and right because we can't pay them quite as much as we'd like, and because there's concerns about what it'll look like when we go back with like ventilation and these pieces that I've already mentioned. So part of the way to support is to not look at this as a novel set of issues, but to remember that when this is all over, all of those things are still going to be in place, and we still have a responsibility to address those pieces.
Yeah, I think as one of the things that I'm hopeful about is as the pandemic hit and as we were moving through the spring semester, that those issues were impacting all of us and really bringing to light those challenges that the least among us feel every day when the internet was crashing for everyone. You suddenly got to experience what it's like not to have internet, or trying to access software that you're unfamiliar with. What that must be like for a family that their child is the only one who's ever interacted with a computer at school. All of those things. So I'm hopeful that, like as you said, that this will forward that conversation, because we'll be able to harken back. Remember a few months ago, you were impacted by the same thing, and as much as things have changed, they've stayed the same for a lot of people.
That's right.
To that point, what can parents and the community do to show their support for Arizona's schools and Arizona's educators?
Well, the obvious answer is to vote. Right? I'm not here to tell anybody how to vote or to preach about politics, but I am able to say that local elections, particularly on the state level, have an unbelievably large impact on how schools operate. And so when casting your ballot, you just make sure you do your homework with education in mind. And then in turn, you can say that the experience that you had can translate into the person or people that best matches your set of ideals. The other piece is just a lot of grace, that students are struggling, that teachers are struggling, principals are struggling, superintendents and boards, oh good heavens, parents, and that a lot of grace, but with the genuine desire to change education moving forward. Because again, if we don't do that, then we'll find ourselves looking back going, man, that was wild, and we're still here, right? It seems like that's can't be what happens.